I remember the first time I said it out loud. He's gone. The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's story. For weeks, people told me I was overthinking, that I had trust issues, that I should be grateful to have a man like him. They said I was too intense, too emotional, too me. But the truth is, I never really had him at all. I'm sitting in the apartment we used to share, if you can even call it that. The light from the street spills through the blinds, blue and heavy like water. The air feels thick, like something is still here even though he's not. On the chair next to me, his white shirt, the one with the initials Michael R. stitched inside the collar. I used to think it was some brand or maybe a hand-me-down. Now I know it was a name that didn't belong to the man I thought I loved. The silence in this room doesn't feel empty, it feels haunted. Every sound echoes too loud, like the place itself is asking, who was he, really? I keep going back to the smallest moments, the ones that never made sense but I ignored because love teaches you to explain things away. The late-night texts he'd hide, the business trips he never posted about, the way he'd sometimes pause, just a second too long when I said his name. I tell myself this is just another heartbreak, that I'll move on like everyone else. But this isn't heartbreak. It's something colder, more surgical, like someone took my reality apart piece by piece and rearranged it into something unrecognizable. Everyone told me I was lucky, and maybe I was. Lucky enough to see what love looks like when it's a performance. Lucky enough to learn that trust can be the most dangerous illusion of all. When I close my eyes, I still see him, standing in the doorway, smiling that calm, patient smile, the same one that made me believe everything was fine. But now, even that smile feels like a lie carefully rehearsed in a mirror. The camera shakes slightly as I lift the shirt closer. The fabric still smells like his cologne, faint, expensive, calculated. I trace the letters with my finger. Michael R. The name that was never his, the name that broke everything open. And as the music swells and the lights fade, I whisper it. Not for him, but for me. He was never mine. We met in the most ordinary way possible, in a coffee shop on a gray Tuesday morning. I was half awake, half dreaming, staring at my laptop screen when he asked if the seat across from me was taken. His voice was calm, low, almost cautious. I looked up, and for a second, I didn't know what to say. He wasn't strikingly handsome, not in the obvious way, but there was something about his eyes, focused, deliberate, like he was really seeing me, not just looking. That was David. Or at least, that's who I thought he was. Our first conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. He asked questions that felt personal but never invasive. What kind of books I read, why I preferred mornings to nights, what I thought people feared the most. I remember laughing and saying, probably being forgotten. And he smiled, not with his mouth but with his eyes, and said quietly, no. It's being remembered wrong. There was something about the way he spoke, like he'd thought about everything a little too much. It didn't feel rehearsed, though. It felt intentional, like every word mattered. By the time I realized I was late for work, I didn't care. We exchanged numbers, and I left the cafe feeling lighter than I had in months. He texted that night, simple things at first. Did you get home okay? You drink your coffee too fast. I liked how you laughed at the part about being remembered wrong. That kind of thing. The kind of messages that make you feel seen without feeling hunted. It was new, refreshing, safe. 2 weeks later, he was already part of my routine. We'd meet after work, have dinner, sometimes walk around the city for hours. He remembered tiny details, the exact way I took my coffee, my least favorite street because of the flickering light, even the story I told once about my mother's favorite perfume. He listened, really listened, like he was building a map of me in his head. When he first stayed the night, I didn't plan it, it just happened. He forgot his toothbrush the next morning, laughed about it, then came back that evening with 2. One for me, one for you, he said. I remember thinking how sweet that was, how thoughtful. The next week, his watch appeared on my nightstand, then a sweatshirt on the back of my chair, then a book on my shelf. It was so gradual I didn't even realize he was moving in. He'd always fall asleep before me. I'd lie there, tracing the shape of his shoulder under the sheets, listening to his steady breathing. Every night before bed, he'd reach over, grab his phone, and switch it to silent. "Work," he'd say. "They call me at insane hours. I just need peace when I'm with you." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? It felt nice, the idea that he wanted the world to go quiet when he was near me. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd wake up and see the faint glow from the screen, like the phone had come alive again. He'd always turn it over quickly, muttering something about a client or a project. I never pushed. I told myself that trust meant not asking too many questions. Looking back now, I realize how carefully everything was arranged, how perfect it all felt. In that cinematic way that only exists right before something breaks. Every smile, every touch, every quiet morning felt like the calm before a storm I didn't know was coming. And maybe that's how all lies begin, not with deceit, but with comfort so deep you stop noticing the edges of the cage being built around you. I started noticing the smallest things first, the kind of details you only see when your heart already knows something's wrong, but your mind refuses to believe it. His shirts smelled different. Not bad, just different. A softer scent, like lavender mixed with something artificial, like the detergent ads on TV. I use jasmine, always have. It's our smell, the smell of home. But this wasn't mine. It wasn't ours. Then there was the watch, a silver one I'd never seen before. At first, I thought it was new, maybe a gift he bought for himself. He's always been a little vain about time, punctual, precise, proud of being the man who's never late. But sometimes the watch disappeared, just gone. I'd ask about it and he'd say, "It's at the repair shop," or "Left it at work." But then it would reappear again, no scratches, no changes, like it had been living another life somewhere else. And then, the receipt. I wasn't looking for it. I was just cleaning his wallet the way I always do when he forgets and leaves it open on the table. It was a small crumpled piece of paper, the kind you almost throw away without looking. But I looked. A coffee shop, in another city. 2 cups, 2 pastries. A date, printed right there in black ink, on the same day he told me he was working late. That night I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and listened to him breathe beside me. I tried to count the seconds between each breath, as if somewhere in the rhythm I'd find an answer. The next morning, I told myself I was being paranoid. People travel for work. People buy coffee. People can forget what detergent they use. I wanted to believe that so badly. But then came the dry cleaner. I dropped off his blue shirt, the one with the faint pinstripes and the missing button on the sleeve. I handed it to the woman behind the counter, same woman who'd been there 100 times before, and she smiled at me with polite familiarity. "Like last time for Mr. Michael?" she said. I froze. "Michael?" I asked. My voice cracked, too soft. She looked confused, then shrugged. "Yes, Mr. Michael. The same starch level, right?" I nodded, my mouth dry. "Yes, same." When I walked out, I felt the air shift. It started with curiosity, that soft, quiet kind that pretends to be innocent, the kind that whispers, "You're not paranoid, you're just being careful." One afternoon, while he was in the shower, I opened Google Maps on his tablet. I don't even know what I expected to find. Maybe a pattern, maybe nothing. But there it was. Tiny red pins, silent witnesses. A cluster of them, all around the same neighborhood. A place we never visit. No friends there, no clients, no reason. Yet he'd been there. Over and over again. Sometimes in the morning, sometimes late at night. Always that same area. I zoomed in. A cafe, a small park, a quiet residential street. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I told myself I was just imagining things. Maybe his work took him there. Maybe he had meetings. Maybe. That evening, he kissed me goodbye and said he'd be working late. His voice was calm, practiced. I smiled back, pretending not to notice the faint hesitation before he spoke. A pause, too short to mean anything, too long to mean nothing. Hours passed. At first, I watched TV. Then I read. Then I stared at the clock until the numbers stopped looking real. When it hit midnight, I called him. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. Finally, my phone buzzed. A message popped up. Busy. Call later. My heart slowed for a second. Relief, maybe. But then I looked closer. It wasn't from WhatsApp. It was from iMessage. He doesn't use iMessage. We never do. His WhatsApp photo, his WhatsApp number, that's our line, the one we've always used. So why this? Why now? From which phone? I felt a chill, the kind that doesn't come from cold, but from realizing that something you believed in, deeply, blindly, might not exist at all. I couldn't sleep. The house felt too quiet, too staged. Every sound, the fridge humming, the clock ticking, felt like it was mocking me. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I started digging. First, the bank statements, the routine bills, the subscriptions, the everyday expenses, all familiar, all normal. But then, buried between them, I found a name that didn't belong. Michael R. I told myself I wasn't really following him, that I just needed closure, something solid. A reason that would make all the small, sharp suspicions dissolve into nothing. But deep down, I already knew. It was a gray morning, the kind where the world feels half asleep. The streets were still damp from rain, the sky heavy and colorless. I sat in my car across the street from his building, my fingers tapping nervously on the steering wheel. Every few seconds I checked the rearview mirror, like guilt might suddenly appear there. My coffee went cold long before he came out. He looked exactly like the man I knew. Same calm expression, same neatly knotted tie. But something about the way he moved, it felt deliberate, controlled, like he was performing a role. He got into his car, the same car I'd cleaned, laughed in, kissed him in, and started driving. I followed, keeping 2 cars behind. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it over the sound of the wipers. He didn't take the route downtown, not the way to his office. Instead, he turned off the main road, heading toward the suburbs, the kind of place with quiet streets and trimmed hedges where nothing bad ever happens. I whispered to myself, maybe he's meeting a client. Maybe it's nothing. But I could feel my pulse telling me otherwise. He stopped in front of a small, pale blue house, the kind that looks like it's been lived in for years, with children's toys scattered on the lawn, a bicycle leaning against the porch, curtains drawn just enough to keep secrets. He stepped out, straightened his tie, and walked toward the door like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Then the door opened. A woman appeared, mid-30s, warm smile, hair tied back. She looked familiar, in that soft, ordinary way strangers sometimes do. And then a little boy ran out, maybe 4, maybe 5. The man I knew, the one who said he had no family, who claimed to hate children, bent down and lifted the boy into his arms. He kissed him on the head. Then he kissed the woman. It wasn't quick or secretive. It was gentle, natural, practiced. My body went cold. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but I couldn't move. All I could do was watch. He laughed. That night, the silence in our apartment felt heavier than usual. Thick, like fog that refuses to lift. I didn't turn on the lights. I wanted him to walk into the dark, to feel the same unease I'd lived with for weeks. His keys rattled in the lock around 9 p.m. I remember that sound vividly, so ordinary, so domestic. It used to make me smile. Now, it made my stomach twist. "Hey," he said softly, stepping inside. His voice casual, like everything was perfectly fine. He looked tired, maybe even relieved to be home. He kissed my cheek. I didn't move. He didn't notice at first. He walked past me, loosened his tie, poured himself a glass of water, the same routine, as if the world hadn't shifted beneath us. Then I spoke, quietly. "Where were you tonight?" He froze, just for a second, then smiled that careful smile, the one that never reached his eyes. "I told you. Late meeting." I nodded. Then I reached behind me and placed the folded shirt on the table, the one from the dry cleaner, the one with the tag that said Michael R. For a moment, he didn't look at it. When he finally did, his face changed. Not shock, not guilt, something colder, calculation. He blinked, once, twice, and then, finally, he exhaled and said, very quietly, "I can explain." But he didn't. He didn't move toward me, didn't reach out. He just looked around the room, our room, as if deciding what to take with him. "What's your real name?" I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was steady, controlled. "Who are they?" He didn't answer. He just went to the bedroom, opened the closet, and started taking clothes off hangers. Methodical, calm. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but I couldn't. The silence felt sacred, like I might shatter it if I spoke. When he walked past me toward the door, suitcase in hand, I whispered, "Say something." He stopped. For a heartbeat, I thought he might turn around, that maybe I'd see the man I thought I loved one last time. But he didn't. He just said, almost gently, "You were never supposed to find out." And then he left. The sound of the door closing echoed in the apartment like a gunshot. The next morning, I woke up I got out and walked up to the door, knocked once, then again. No one answered. Through the window, I saw nothing. No furniture, no boxes, no trace of life. It was like the house had been wiped clean, like they'd never been there at all. And that's when it hit me. He hadn't just left. He'd erased himself. Every trace, every thread, every piece of him that had ever existed in my world, gone. The man I loved was a story I'd been told, and I was the only one left who remembered it. After he disappeared, silence became a sound I couldn't escape. It hummed through my apartment, followed me down streets, echoed in the pauses between my thoughts. I kept telling myself there had to be a reason, some rational explanation. People don't just vanish like smoke, not without leaving a shadow. One night, I sat down at my laptop and typed his name into Google. Nothing, just empty pages, unrelated faces, strangers with familiar names. Then, on a whim, I typed the name I'd seen on the dry cleaning tag, Michael R. Lawson. The first result hit me like a physical blow. His face, smiling. The same blue eyes, the same half smirk I used to love. But the name under it was wrong. Michael R. Lawson. And his life, completely different. He wasn't a systems analyst at a finance firm. He was listed as a consultant at a company I'd never heard of, in a city 3 hours away. The bio said he'd graduated from a university he never mentioned, that he'd grown up in Maine, not Chicago. The more I scrolled, the stranger it got. Dozens of photos, him at parties, dinners, family gatherings, but the people in them were strangers. A different woman appeared often beside him, smiling, holding his hand, sometimes a little boy between them. It felt like watching my own life through a cracked mirror, familiar pieces, but rearranged into something unrecognizable. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the room around me. I clicked through his friends list, dozens of names. Mutuals I didn't know, cities I'd never visited. I realized he had built an entire existence, parallel to mine. 2 apartments, 2 jobs, 2 sets of friends, 2 lives running side by side, never touching, never overlapping. And in both of them, he was someone else. I zoomed in on one photo. He was wearing the same shirt he'd worn to my birthday dinner, the same faint wrinkle at the collar. But in this picture, he was holding a child, not a glass of wine. That's when I understood. I hadn't been cheated on. I'd been replaced, or maybe duplicated. Every word he'd ever said, every "I love you," every moment I'd thought was ours, they were borrowed from another story. And the worst part? Even that second life wasn't real either. I kept digging, deeper, into public records, into company pages. Even when people ask me what happened to him, I never know what to say. How do you explain losing someone who never really existed? How do you mourn a man who was more story than skin? Sometimes I sit in front of the camera, trying to find the right words. But words feel too small for what he did. He wasn't cheating. He was rehearsing a life, testing out emotions like costumes, trying on people like roles. Every "I love you," every kiss, every silence was an experiment in human behavior. I was never his partner. I was his variable. I remember finding a small box after he disappeared. It was tucked behind my bookshelf, like it was waiting for me. Inside were pieces of our life, a spare key, a photo from our first trip together, a coffee receipt with his handwriting on the back. "Don't forget this moment." I used to think that note was romantic. Now it feels like evidence, like a line from a script he was revising. There was also a letter. No greeting, no signature, just one sentence. You made me almost believe I was real. I read it 100 times, looking for meaning between the words, for something human, but there was nothing, just ink on paper, cold and deliberate. It's strange, the kind of grief that follows, not the loud, tear-stained kind. It's quiet. It sits in the corner of your mind, whispering questions you can't answer. Who was he? What did he want? How many other lives did he live before mine, and how many after? I moved apartments, changed my number, stopped wearing the perfume he liked. But every now and then I'll see someone on the street, same walk, same profile, and my heart will stop for just a second. Then I remember, he's gone. Or maybe he was never really here. Sometimes I dream of him, not as the man I loved, but as the person I never truly met. In the dream, he's standing in a doorway, half in shadow, smiling the way he used to when he thought I wasn't looking. I try to ask him who he really is, but he never answers. He just turns and walks away. And that's the hardest part. Not the lies, not the betrayal, but the silence that follows. The space he left behind isn't empty. It's full of echoes, of questions, of what-ifs, of pieces of a